What we're going to do is a round of introductions. We're going to be talking today about the nighttime economy. We're going to talk about economic development in college towns. We're going to talk about some of what makes college towns unique from that perspective. And we've got a panel here that has mayors on it. It has folks who kind of created the nighttime mayor concept in the UK 15 or so years ago. We've got folks bringing in a perspective from the Tempe, Phoenix area. And then we have Ms. Beth Bagwell, who's going to give us a little introduction to ITGA. So that's what we're going to do together for the next hour. So what we're going to do first is have the panel introduce themselves. And Ms. Beth, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you so much. My name is Beth Bagwell. I'm the Executive Director of ITGA, the International Town and Gown Association.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Justin Mahar-Krawick. I'm actually a project lead at Nighttime Economy Solutions.
Thank you.
Make sure I'm on. I'm Steve Patterson, mayor of the great city of Athens, Ohio, home to Ohio University, as well as the president of the International Town Gown Association.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm Jevin Hodge, lead national engagement and partnerships at Link Strategic Partners.
Thank you all for being here. Beth, I'm going to start with you. We are live streaming across about a dozen channels right now. So we have a lot of people who are watching who might not know what ITGA is and what the conference is. So for those folks tuning in remotely, could you talk a little bit about ITGA, its purpose, and what our conference is about?
Sure. The International Town and Gown Association is a membership-based organization, and we work with universities and their host communities. And we really deal with quality of life issues. And this year, we've brought a great group of together in Fort Collins and Colorado State University. And we are talking about bikes, bucks, belonging, and fear. And so it really is a great context of, you know, what we all deal with. Our topics that we have every conference is really something that is about the host community that we're in, but it's also global enough to include anybody who comes to our conferences. We love the networking. We also know that our members really come to the conference. The driver is content. So our content is really stellar. We want to make sure that we're addressing what's important to our members. And anybody that's really interested in learning more about the International Town and Gown Association, I would love for you to reach out to me or to reach out to any of the board members. If you're joining us online, my email address is beth@itga.org. And I think that as far as our conferences, we have annual conferences, and then we do a lot of networking opportunities throughout the year, such as what we're doing today.
Thank you, Beth. Brittany Waddell's in the audience here. We were counting up last night. I think this is our, 14th ITGA conference? 15th ITGA conference. It's always a phenomenal convening. What I love about it is we bring in people from literally around the world, but it's still a manageable enough experience that you leave with a real network of folks. So I know you can't tell us where we're going to be next year. That's going to be announced later at lunch, but I'd encourage everyone to come out and join ITGA. So what we're going to do now, let's spend a little moment just kind of setting the stage and talking about what we mean by nighttime economy, what we mean by night mayor and those types of things. I'm actually going to go to Justin first. Your group, which I know started in the UK, phenomenal founder, Joe Cox-Brown, who I adore, really had this concept about nighttime economy and night mayor and what that looked like. You were about 15 years ahead of us in the UK than where we were here in the US on that. But I think the US and I know Canada has really done a lot in that space. So could you set the stage for us around what the nighttime economy is?
So defined, I suppose, the nighttime economy would be anywhere between anything that happens between 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first thing that comes to mind for most people when they think of nighttime economy is bars, clubs, and things like that, but it actually encompasses everything that happens between those hours. So, and just like you're mentioning, what we found internationally at least is that a lot of this governance actually, or a lot of governance in cities in general, ends around, working hours or 5 or 6 p.m. So policies are set for the daytime. Policies are set for the people who are coming in between those hours. And it has left the nighttime behind in a lot of ways. And especially in the post-COVID world, when you have this mass, I guess exodus might be the wrong word, but this mass kind of people going out from the downtown cores to live around the cities, you now have these downtown cores that no longer have just the regular foot traffic that they did before. So nighttime economy is actually not just working with bars and clubs, but it's also working with developing culture, developing that kind of economic area that half of a city's income is actually part of, right?
That's fascinating. I've at this conference already this week, I'm seeing a number of folks here from Georgetown University who work in off-campus student life and the Pivot program, not the Pivot program, the SNAP program. And I'm thinking about how that program, which I was in a session about yesterday, fills in some of those hours from when like official services end and the nighttime picks up. And so you're doing this on kind of a global level. What does that look like? Are you often working with municipal governments and others who are trying to put together policies and systems?
There we go. So it's not just working with governments. It's working with police forces, working with universities. Obviously, that town-gown relationship is incredibly important for most university towns or college towns. It's working with business improvement districts to help develop policies and safeguarding policies for the night as well. Obviously, students want to feel safe, or people want to feel safe when they're going out. But a lot of times you're finding that policies might encompass alcohol-related issues specifically, but they actually don't focus as much on, violence against women and girls, safeguarding the night in terms of lighting, infrastructure, drug use, which obviously the fentanyl problem has been very bad recently. Everyone's heard about it. But there's a lot of kind of policies in place that are focused around what exists right now that has shown it can't be sustainable moving forward.
Mr. Mayor, I want to bring you in as a mayor of the beautiful Athens, Ohio. How do you think about the nighttime economy and kind of economic development as a whole?
Well, before I jump on that, let me kind of paint a little bit of a picture of Athens. Athens was established in 1797, the university 1804, so the two of us have always grown up together. And, in the 80s and in the 90s, within the city of Athens, it became basically an environment where, for the city government, things happened to you. And we had the Halloween, the infamous Halloween block party that comes up every Halloween. And it was something that almost became the Mardi Gras of the North, but not necessarily in a good way. It was uncontrolled, unsanctioned, and it was something that became, really a financial drain on the city's end, because we were always having to get out and play a protective role, or in some cases, unfortunately, being the sledgehammer when it comes to law enforcement and firefighting as well. We also, in the 90s, in the 80s, when the U.S. really transitioned the drinking age, prior to that, the university would have something called Spring Fest. And Spring Fest was great. It was a controlled festival that was on the university campus, and beer was being sold and provided, and there was good activities and music and bands. But then when the drinking age changed to 21, that's when all that stopped, and everything was kind of pushed into the high-density student areas within the Athens environment. When you have something like that happen, you don't want to lose those fests, and so we started having things that were on streets, like Mill Street had Mill Fest, and Palmer Street had Palmer Fest, and in the early 2000s, we started seeing things happening to where what really became an even greater financial drain on the city for our resources and really for the economy in our historic uptown. We don't have a downtown, we have an uptown in Athens. The uptown historic retail corridor was that these fests would end up leading to, at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, couches and lazy boys and coffee tables being burned in the intersections, which was quite destructive. And then in 2012, we had a block party. It was Palmer Fest, to where an arson torched a house, but there was 7,000 students who had taken over one city block, that is Palmer Street, and were essentially blocking our fire department from getting through, and even worse, kind of huddling around fire hydrants to where the fire department couldn't find where the fire hydrants were. Luckily, the house was saved, but it became a real turning point for how we started viewing what we do. And one of the things, and this again lends itself to the nighttime economy, was, again, it was more of a velvet glove approach as opposed to a sledgehammer, to where we worked with the student body and we said, look, we will have police presence out there on Mill Street, Palmer Fest, High Street with these events, but they're going to be there to ensure that your environment, have a good time, making your environment safe. We actually will have law enforcement out there earlier in the mornings, and so the students started partying earlier in the morning. Kids were coming out in pajamas and having a beer. It was, kegs and eggs kind of a thing. But they also recognized that come 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to slowly start shutting down those house parties. And with that, but we would encourage them, it's basically, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So go uptown and go to the bars where the bars are a controlled environment. That's been extremely successful for us, so much so that we're starting to see other businesses popping up on Court Street and Union Street, which is our historic retail area, that aren't necessarily bars or restaurants. We're seeing more businesses coming in that want to cater to the nightlife. We actually have a hotel for the first time that's going to go up at the intersection of Court and Union, right there at Ohio University's Gateway Entrance Inn, where we'll have something that is also going to have on the first floor retail that is not going to be bars, but it'll be stuff that also augment that nighttime economy. But without those actions that we took within the city of Athens, I don't think that anyone would have thought, hey, a hotel in an area where there's couches burning at the intersection is a good idea.
I appreciate that. So it's you gave us a great historical picture, but what I like about that is you didn't say you can't do these any longer. You said let's do them with these conditions, and then go downtown, support our businesses, and it's a more controlled environment. So you found an economic development approach to a kind of quality of life issue, which I like. Jeff, I want to bring you in. Jevin is the National Engagement Director at Link Strategic Partners, which means he flies around the country looking at and helping to find and cultivate best practices around community engagement, social impact, etc. So both in that context and in the work you've led personally in the Tempe area, what does nightlife economy and economic development look like there, which is such a college town?
Yeah, well, thank you, Michael. And Mr. Mayor, y'all, look at what's happening in Athens, Ohio. This gentleman right here is leading the charge here nationally and doing some incredible work. And so, like Michael said, I travel around the country somewhere in a hot air balloon or a train or a plane or a bus or a car, learning about communities. And I want to take a step back and talk about some of the work in Arizona specifically. So I'm born and raised in Tempe, Arizona. Love the great state 48. I invite you all to come visit. Tempe, Arizona is also home to the largest public university in the United States of America, Arizona State University. And so over the years, I have served as an advisor to the chief of police for the city of Tempe. I currently serve as an advisor to the Arizona Department of Public Safety Director, Jeff Glover, on how do we get millennials and young people engaged and involved in public safety and issues around that. I started an organization called the Manifesto Project that was focusing on answering the brain drain question. And I'm going to tie that back to the nightlife economy in just a little bit, because when you have young people that are passionate about their communities, that all ties into ensuring that you have a vibrant nightlife and vibrant economic development. And one of my favorite roles, I serve as an advisor to the International Firefighters Association, primarily in Arizona. So operating at that intersection of public safety. When you think of public safety, most people think of police, but public safety is also fire as well, and emergency counseling service, among other things, ambulatory services, first aid, among other things. And so we'll take a deep dive into that. But when you, and I'll say this, and I'm going to pass it back over, when you are talking specifically about nightlife, and you're talking about the nightlife economy, you first have to answer the question of what is the health and viability of the city during the day. And when you look at the city during the day, do we have, vibrant jobs? Do we have education happening? Do we have places for people to live? Do we have places, vibrant cities with vibrant nightlives are cities that are places where people want to work, learn, play, grow, raise their families, and spend their days, because then ultimately they want to spend their nights there too. Right? And this is that most valuable time because you're not working, you're not learning, and this is your free time. So if your city is vibrant during the day, and look at any vibrant city, Athens, Ohio, New York City, LA, Washington, D.C., Fort Collins, any city that has a vibrant nightlife, there is something that is attracting it during the day. And so I want to take a deep dive into that, because as we talk about getting people involved and getting people engaged in their daytime city, right, back to making sure that we're addressing the brain drain question for, cities that have college institutions or institutions of higher learning. When we can get people invested in their city during the day, the nightlife economy flourishes as a result. You see issues that are impacting unhoused populations go down. You see issues that are impacting healthcare go down. You see issues as it relates to education increase because you have people that are investing in their city as a whole.
I appreciate that, Jeff, and it's a good kind of universal perspective of how to look at this. Justin, I want to bring you back in. We were talking just off stage about how the pandemic changed everything in many ways, and I know that statement feels overdone, but in this topic specifically, the pandemic changed everything. People are using their cities, their downtown or uptown cores very differently. We do work around the country in places that never had an outdoor dining scene, and then all they could have was an outdoor dining scene, and now they're trying to figure out what is that balance, right? What is that balance of keeping streets open versus closing them? How do we balance transportation with economic development? How do we balance the fact that people really like being outdoors with the fact that people don't like being in traffic jams? So I'm wondering, in your world, how have you seen the pandemic and the post-pandemic world kind of change the dialogue around nightlife economy?
So, as I was mentioning before, obviously the post-pandemic is something no one could explain or prepare for, and now we're living in a different world completely. And a lot of the things, like I was mentioning, that people got used to. So, for example, you've seen bars that be opening into the sidewalks. Policies need to be changed for the short term in order to maintain economic viability for a lot of businesses. What we've actually seen happen is that a lot of these cities have been trying to revert back to the old policies in the hopes to maintain the status quo, so to speak, of what was happening before. But it's the kind of thing, Pandora's box has been opened in a lot of ways, where people have seen what it can be or what can happen. People want these open or walkable areas. People want to be sitting outside at nighttime on a bar, on a patio. They want to have open cafes like right into the street. One of the things over the past 18 months, every single town, city, or organization we worked with, one of the biggest things people talked about is wanting night markets and wanting to have certain streets closed down for cultural events, for local economic growth events, to kind of have that interaction the way we were able to have during COVID, where then it was a little bit elbows apart, social distance, but they want to maintain that. But unfortunately, the policies just aren't there to actually match that, right? So one of the things that we like to try and do is kind of bring that to light with a lot of cities as well. A lot of cities get this kind of, I like to call it a wallpaper effect, where when you walk into your house, you see the same ugly wallpaper all the time, so you don't think it's that ugly. Someone else might show up and say, hey, where did you get that? It's horrible, right? So...
And they would never be invited back.
Exactly, right? So we like to kind of recommend is having the outside eyes sometimes. We've seen different cities actually and understand what can actually work and what doesn't, especially in regards to policy and what has happened across the world. And post-COVID is a prime example of sometimes when bureaucracy can get in the way of progress, or policy can get in the way of progress.
That's fascinating, and Mayor Steve, I'm going to come to you to see kind of how post-pandemic has impacted things in Athens. One of the things that I've seen kind of across the board is how much the pandemic and everything that comes from that focused attention on how interconnected our economies are, especially in college towns, and we're going to come to you in a bit to talk about that dynamic in college towns. We have some of our friends here from the UK in the front row who started an organization called the UK Town Gown Association, which is a sister organization. And I remember very early months of the pandemic, you held a convening, and there was a discussion around many campuses brought a lot of the services that used to be part of the outside economy in-house to provide for their students. It was a perfectly acceptable and needed thing to do. We can have kids going out to local grocery stores. We'll turn our cafeterias into commissaries. That was a good public health measure, decimated local economies. So I learned on one of those UK Town Gown Association panels early on, there were some universities in the UK that said, instead of us building our own grocery stores, why don't we work with the local markets and bring them on campus to recreate what they do here for our students? And I thought it was this really good example of, you don't always have to recreate it yourself. You can bring in those local partners. So I'm wondering what you're seeing in Athens, Ohio, kind of post-pandemic. What partnerships have lasted, which ones hasn't, and kind of how are you looking at all of that?
Well, let me kind of start with, I like the analogy about the wallpaper, by the way. I've got to throw that out there. And not being invited back, I think I flipped the narrative on that one. That person may not want to come back. One of the things that I think, speaking of the pandemic, because we all experienced the pandemic in the same way, but likely in very different ways as well. What we're seeing, and I'm looking at my friend Todd Kamadish from Kent State, is that, I think we've had, if you think about it, 2 years of students who there were no fests. There were no, outdoor events that took place, and it kind of hit the reset for a lot of communities. It certainly did with ours, to where now this year we were able to kind of step in along with our community partners to kind of recreate the narrative. That what you see now is the way it's always been, as opposed to the what we heard in the past, because unfortunately the city of Athens became, not that any of us are proud of this, the last thing a university community wants to do is show up number one on the party school list, because that's going to affect your student enrollment big time. And for a couple of years we were, and we fought hard not to. The pandemic, I think, has further accelerated that, but has also kind of created something to where the students are jonesing for something more that is not alcohol related, it is not party related. And we were able to pivot quickly with our Uptown Business Association to where they recognized that too and started changing their hours of operation. They started rethinking, what is my product that I'm putting out? What am I providing as a service? And rethinking that as well. Again, I mentioned the hotel, which happened to be, back in the day, it was a bookstore, and there was a plasma donation up above. And then it sat fallow for several years. And so we see a real opportunity with that redevelopment. And I think that's going to benefit the students too. And more importantly, it's going to benefit the parents who want to come on moms and dads weekend and give them a place that's closer in to where their kids are staying in the residence halls or off campus. So I think, again, the pandemic really, really flipped a lot of narratives. Our farmers market used to take place kind of on the far east end of the city. It was on a black-topped mall parking lot for a number of years. Certainly not the most attractive place to have a farmer's market. And it became difficult for the students who did want to go, and especially our international student body, who grew up to where a farmer's market, I remember walking through the streets of Paris and stumbling upon the Sorbonne had a farmer's market thing that was there basically every day, and that was their lived experience, was that this is what we do. Ours was not that. Ours was on Saturdays, Wednesdays, and Saturday mornings. And so Farmers Market came to the city and said, could we be at your community center in the park, which is right off of an amazing bike path that is all of a mile away from the center of the university campus and even closer to the residence halls. So now the kids hop on an e-bike or whatever and zoom down there and do their shopping. And it's really accelerated our local farmers. They're now really benefiting from it, for the farming, the ag community in our community, but it's also servicing the student body. And again, I would say in particular, the international students who are coming from places where this is the way my world is, yet your farmer's market pre-pandemic was so far away. And the bus service didn't go down there either, by the way, which is terrible. But anyway, it is what it is. But now it's completely shifted gears to where now we're seeing more student involvement at the farmers market, which, think about that for a second. Talk about community engagement. So now we have the students that are showing up at farmers market, which all our local population goes to farmers market every Saturday morning. And so we're starting to see these relationships that are taking place, which to me is absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely. Beth, I want to bring you in if I can. When Mayor Steve was talking about there's been a reset of activities and expectations, and he said not everything is alcohol-centric, and we've got to find new ways to do that. I know ITGA has some strategic partnerships that have been looking at that. That's something you've worked on. Could you unpack a little bit of what that's looked like?
Well, we know that students, it's amazing how many students don't want to go to alcohol-related parties. They want to have different events. We know that a lot of our students that have come out of the pandemic are hurting because with mental health issues, and we don't want them to have large consumptions of alcohol. So when you talk about these sociable cities and how we're no longer 9 to 5 and we want the economic development, and how are we going to help these downtowns that are going to actually be robust again, because some of these downtowns actually shut down and they didn't get their businesses back, because they didn't have the funding. So we know that students like to have alternative opportunities. Do you know, on a study at the CU Boulder, one of the things that students said that they wanted to do was dance. They wanted to be able, you could probably speak to this, Jeremy, because I think you were there and you probably know that at that particular time, but they wanted to dance. We know that students enjoy coloring activities, things that I think we actually took for granted and thought that that was, not something, but, having these spaces for students where I just walked into, interestingly enough, the off-campus housing office, and when I walked in, the lights were off, they were down, and they were resting. And I said, well, I just kind of I messed this up, but anyway. So it's amazing that we have students who are looking for alternatives, and I think we need to be ready to do that, particularly even as we're talking about sociable cities, and how do we do that, and how can we partner with downtown areas who will help do things like that, because the businesses in the downtown area really want to see the students, and you all probably hear that all the time. How can they bring the students into the downtown area? And I think that would be one of the strategies, is what are these non-alcoholic parties look like? And I think students are really hungry for it.
Who doesn't like to dance, right? That's a fantastic thing. Justin, I want to go to you to talk a little bit about the policies that support vibrant nighttime economies. We've talked about a few of them from a public safety standpoint, economic development. Let's talk about transportation for a moment, because I think what a lot of people don't realize in some cities, it's not just transportation to get people there, it's how the workers in those economies get to and from, right? So if a bar shuts down at 2, how's the workforce getting back home at 3? And does public transportation support that, et cetera? So as you do work with cities, how does transportation policy kind of fit in?
So before I get into transportation, one thing that we find is actually very important, especially for employees of the nighttime economy, is actually safety. So one thing that's not, I guess it's thought about, but in the terms of actually policy or infrastructure put in place, lighting, policing, or visible policing, one thing that we've actually found really valuable for us, basically for people going into downtown to enjoy themselves, in the nighttime economy to enjoy themselves, and for the employees, was the development of safe spaces. So I know we actually just recently worked with Bath, developing something we call a safe bus, where it was actually a bus that's filled with some EMT services, volunteers who are there to basically help people get from where they need to be, and really just kind of allows there to be a safe space within the city that people can go to and understand that I can get help here. And even if you need something, I need water or a pair of flip-flops for them to walk home in the bars at night, or something small that's like low cost but high impact, right? Things like this really make a difference in the vibrancy of towns, right? And also, in terms of what we found, at least, for every pound invested into something like this for safe spaces, the city saves 9 pounds on the actual EMT or emergency services that are actually brought away from working that. So it's a 9 times investment to develop one of these things, right? So that alone right away when thinking about the nighttime economy, especially for employees, I think is incredibly important. But secondary, you get the, and I'll use Edmonton as an example, someone we're working with. A lot of Edmonton, being a relative northern Canadian city, has a lot of snow, a lot of darkness throughout the year. The lighting, especially in these LRT stations or these transportation, it's developed for the daytime users, right? So you have the lighting that is that kind of soft yellow light or whatever it is that during the day, sure, it works, you go underground, that's fine, but in the nighttime, it looks like you're walking through a bit of a horror movie, right? And if you're a nighttime employee at that time, you're not feeling safe if you're going out. And even getting onto the buses or getting onto anywhere, there needs to be the policy in place to ensure that it's understood where the infrastructure is that can provide these safe spaces. So one thing I know that a lot of bus and transportation routes shut down around 9 or 10 p.m. with like a single bus in and out of the city that might not be on the route for certain places, especially when you get more rural. You might not even have these park and rides anymore, right? So if you're going to be able to go to the downtown as an employee or as a consumer, you're going to need to take your car, which has risks of its own, drunk driving or issues like that. So policy-wise, there's so much to unpack that I don't think we have enough time to even get into it. But I do think that there's the development of safe spaces and the focusing on safeguarding the night within these currently existing transportation areas is probably the most important first step. And then you can start looking at specific transportation routes and policy that follow that.
I think one of the themes that's coming through is just how interconnected all of these topics are, right? It's not just transportation or just alcohol policy or just public safety. it's all of it, and the more we can find collaborative ways to work together, that helps. Jeff, you mentioned at the beginning something called the Manifesto Project, and I want to bring that in because I know brain drain is kind of an overused term in some ways, but such an important term. If you have young people and you have young people attracted to college towns, what happens after they skill up, right? They've got their degrees, etc. Are they staying? Is there room for them in the local economy? What's not? I know you worked on a whole project in Arizona. I think you started it when you were in high school. Can you talk a little bit about what Manifesto is and why that's important?
So the Manifesto Project was a project that was focused on answering the brain drain question. How do we attract talent and retain talent, most importantly? We learned at that point in time that Arizona State University was attracting a substantial amount of their freshman class from out of state. It was in the high 40s, sometimes in the 50% of their freshman class was coming from somewhere else. And then when the senior class was graduating, it was in the mid 50s to 60s of the amount of people that were leaving, which is ridiculous because the next generation of engineers, doctors, lawyers, civil servants need to be in Arizona because they're getting educated there. And so what we learned through the opportunity of connecting with the community, traveling around the state, taking that deep dive, digesting everything, and working with the university systems in the state was that young people wanted more from their communities. And I know that sounds like a blanket statement, but when you give folks the opportunity to lead and to serve in their communities as a young person, it creates that everlasting hook that keeps them involved and engaged. And with that, we were learning that these organizations that were partnering with youth serving or young people serving institutions like education institutions or healthcare centers, etc., that we saw that there was no collective tissue that was ensuring that there was a transfer of intellectual knowledge, right? So you have folks that are in the organization serving on these boards, and then they retire and then they go away. They're not mentoring, they're not training, they're not inviting other people to be involved. So the Manifesto Project then came up with an initiative where we had a board apprentice program, where we partnered with organizations like St. Vincent St. Mary's and United Food Bank and several government agencies, among others, so that we could pair a young person who was passionate about that interest of the institution, and they served as an apprentice on the board with the opportunity to apply. And what we saw as a result was if you got somebody when they were 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 years old to serve on a board, right? You saw the investment, but you also saw an opportunity for folks to engage other people. It was an expansion of their network. It was an expansion of their knowledge. I mean, we were working with the United Steel Mill that was out there, and they were one of the partners, and they didn't have a social media presence until they got a young person on their board to advise them to use social media, right? And you think about an institution that is employing thousands of people, that's providing steel for the entire Southwest, etc., but didn't have a vibrant social media presence until they got a young person on their board. And so going back to what Justin was talking about when you're talking about public safety and everything else and tying this back together, one of the other things that we saw was when you open your focus group areas or when you open your information input areas to students, a lot of people leave students out of the conversation because it's a transient population, right? They're here for 4 years, they're here for 3 years, and they're leaving. But when you open the feedback to come from students, you saw that when they saw themselves at the table, providing input and insight to build that community, they wanted to be a part of it long term. And they wanted to stay long term. And out of the Manifesto Project, Intel, who has a big plant in Arizona, they opened up their young person board where they had all of the young employees. I was advising the heads of the Intel, and then we partnered with the labor unions, and they opened up, their opportunity for recruiting, their apprentice in high school, right? They went from recruiting them after high school, recruiting them in high school, so on and so forth. But as you're building a vibrant economy, and especially a nighttime economy, people want to be at the table. They want to be involved in the conversation. They want to see themselves. They want to see themselves in the solutions that are being put forth, and that's how we're going to create that buy-in moving forward. And as we do that, as we see that, like the mayor just highlighted, you're going to see transformational change as a result.
I love that, Jev, and there are so many processes on and around campuses and in government that should be open to students that it's not always clear where those entry points are, but they're so important. We're working on a project with Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland, and they're doing a facilities master plan. They've made it a very open process to their students, but also to their surrounding residential neighbors. And one of the things that's come out of the facilities planning so far is this idea of we need to understand what our business community is doing so that we're not trying to replicate something they are better served to do and vice versa, right? So it's a facilities plan for the campus, but in the context of what students need just on and off campus. So we've got to open these things up. I'm going to go down the panel and we're going to get one last comment from each of you as people go back to the rest of this beautiful conference and as they go back to their lives online for those who are streaming. What is one thing you want people to take away from? Obviously, Beth, you want them to join ITGA, and you'll tell them how to do that. But what is one thing you want people to take away from this discussion?
Well, first of all, I think just learning from each other, networking, that's really important. Taking this back to your town. We want the sociable cities. We want to be able to take care of students, what they need, and the different leaders in the communities who are going to make this happen. So I think, and as you go to different concurrent sessions, things that really resonate with you, I've talked to a lot of people who are taking ideas that they have here, they want to take back to their cities and figure out what it's going to look like for them. So those takeaways from the sessions and taking it back to your community and getting other people excited. I love Jevin's excitement when he talks about something that he loves. And so if you're doing what you love, then it's no longer work. And we have a lot of work to do. The other thing I would say, the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations that we've had are extremely important. We have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Beth. Justin, what would you like people to take away?
I'd like people to start to understand not just the value of the nighttime economy, but also what it really means for the daytime economy as well. As the nighttime economy actually creates a feedback effect for the daytime economy, where if you have, for example, issues in the nighttime, then you might have this perception of safety that it's very unsafe in the daytime as well, right? So what I'd like people to actually do is take a look inwards and take a look at your cities, look at your towns, look at your relationships, really give yourself an audit, or to have someone else give you an audit, to be honest. Same with that wallpaper theory I was talking about earlier. But really look at what is going right, what is going wrong, and talk to the people that are involved, especially the students, because they know. At the end of the day, what right worked for you doesn't work anymore, right? So talk to the people involved and create your plans, your nightlife plans based on the people you talk to, right? Sometimes when you're so high up the mountain and you're making these decisions, you forget about what's going on down the bottom, right? And what might be best for you is not best for what's going on, boots on the ground perspective.
I love that. Mine would be, you can't do your nighttime economy planning only in the daytime, right? There's a certain element of it that you have to be on the ground for. So we do a lot of work with colleges that are trying to figure out their nighttime programming and say, okay, you need to get your president, your dean of students, we need to be out there at 2 o'clock in the morning really figuring out what these travel patterns are, what these traffic patterns are. Be out there, understand this. Same with the city leadership, right? You've got to be down there and out there to understand what this looks like. Boots on the ground. It's very, very important. It's also fun, too, when you get a university president out there at 2 in the morning and they run into a student who says, oh, Mr. President. It's an interesting thing. I'm going to go to Mayor Steve next, and then as we wrap up, if there's anyone in the audience that has an example from a nighttime economy project or solution in your own town or campus that you want to bring into the space, we'll do that as well. Go ahead.
You know, I think one of the main things for city government is you got to shift the narrative from being reactive to being proactive. And not only proactive, but proactive in engaging with the students. And it's been said a lot today, is listening to the students. What do the students want? What is it that they find that would be a benefit to them in your nighttime economy, in your economy, period? You know, one of the things we did early on where we have a joint police advisory council between the Ohio University's police department and the city's police department. But we also had an undergraduate and a graduate student. And one of the things we learned right away was the student saying, hey, you've got this nuisance party ordinance, and I can, you know, get a minor misdemeanor. That could destroy my career moving forward after I graduate. And so we got to work with city council, and we flipped that narrative and said, no, you'll give maybe a civil penalty. It's something that can be corrected, and giving that grace to you, recognizing that people can mess up. Anybody can mess up. We'll let you mess up once. And so by doing something like that, and we've done many things that are related, and it's being consistent, and the students are recognizing they are listening. They are listening, they are honoring what they say, and they want my input. And so you've got to listen, and you've got to be consistent.
Jeff?
going to build upon the mayor, and then I'm going to defy the rules because I'm a rule breaker and give you two pieces. Number one is by design, biologically, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And that's by design. We're supposed to listen before we speak, and a lot of people out there, I'm not pointing any fingers, but a lot of people out there do a really good job of listening with their mouth. Close it and really learn. And that will take you so much further. The second is I'm going to leave you with a quote from my second favorite president of all time, President Jeff Bartlett. And for those of you who are truly loyal, there you go, you will remember in season 4 at the episode 100 Hours in America, it was the most presidential day of all time. There was a bombing at Tennessee State University. He had everything happening with the economy among everything else. And then that night, President Bartlett had to give a speech at a dinner of some sort. And he gets on stage and he talks about how at the bombing at the university, the swimmers in the pool got out of the fire and they got out of the pool and ran towards the fire. They ran into the fire. So first off, you all that are doing this work, you're running into the fire every single day. And remember that your communities and lineages will be grateful for the work that you're doing right now as you're building communities long term. But then President Bartlett gets on stage and he then says that every time that we think that we have measured our capacity to meet a challenge, we will look up and we will be reminded that our capacity may well be limitless. So when you think that something is impossible and you think that something is not attainable and you think that something is, you're never going to be able to find a solution, put your head down, do the work, because every time you're going to find out that your capacity is limitless.
So you all see why we asked Jeff to go last. There's no way to follow that, right? So thank you, Jevin. That was fantastic. We are wrapping up here into the audience who is baked in the sun through this whole session. Thank you. I want to open up, if anyone has an example from their nighttime economy that they'd like to share, I'd love to get one or two thoughts in here. Anyone have a thought from anything that's working in your community or a question for the panel? Or did we cover it all? Yes, please. Come on up. Got to get you on camera here. Go ahead, Bruce.
Hi, I'm Bruce Gammonley. I'm a lifelong resident of Fort Collins. I went to CSU, so I've got 26 years of experience with this community. And I've got to say, the pandemic really definitely had an effect. We are still seeing the effects with especially the transit system. A number of bus drivers no longer exist, essentially, for the city. And we've certainly seen a lack of transportation for the nighttime economy. So I was wondering, I know you guys briefly touched on it, but if you could expand more on how specifically transportation can aid in the development of a nighttime economy for a place
like Fort Collins, where we do have, a solid number of bars, we have a solid number of businesses that could be making a substantial profit during the nighttime economy, but there are a number of barriers, and one of the most significant ones is transportation.
Yeah. Bruce, I know from meeting you inside that you work for Spin, right? One of the scooter companies?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's not trying to do a plug there, but can you talk a little bit about that? Do you see that as fitting into the nighttime economy as well?
Personally, I certainly do. I joined Spin when it first came to Fort Collins because I really saw the value of their mission. As a student at CSU, I would go to classes and I would be done with rehearsal. I was a theater major at 10 p.m. and there were no more options of getting home aside from hoofing it or bringing my bike with me. And so by creating a micromobility option in the town, it's really provided an avenue for people to be able to get where they need to go after hours, especially with the lack of transit system that we have currently.
Good. Anyone have a thought on transportation?
Well, I do, and Bruce, I appreciate you mentioning that, and that you are a major part of micromobility. I believe micromobility really serves a purpose in the nighttime economy. I think, whenever I travel somewhere, I usually look to see, do they have e-scooters or do they have e-bikes? Because then that might be a way I can get around Washington, D.C., as scary as that could be, but it is a form of transportation. The city of Athens, we do have micromobility, but here's the key, is it's great to have micromobility, but if you don't have the infrastructure in place to where there is a safe place in which they can ride that micromobility, then you've got an issue, because then you start to see conflicts of different types. So just to share. And that onus falls on the municipality, quite honestly, to sit there and go, okay, how do I partner with you, with whomever, and figure out a way to make a safer transit environment. I look here in Fort Collins, and I'll tell you what, Fort Collins has got it going on. You know, they're a platinum bicycle city, USA. You know, I see pedestrian crosswalks over a bike path, and it's like, huh, must be a lot of people riding bikes. But as opposed to cars, you know, and leave the cars at home, especially when you've got a lot of nightlife going on. You don't want people hopping in and using that form of transportation.
Yes, I agree. And one of the things that I would add is, once upon a time when I was a student on the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, I was in sophomore in high school, we led a focus group for the city of Tempe, and we didn't have a bus option for youth. And as you were a high school student or a young college student, you had the transit system, right, that was communicating or commuting throughout the city, but there wasn't any further options that went with that. And so we led a year-long process around how do we find a solution for that. And one of the, we actually had two recommendations that came out of that. One of which was free bus passes, right? That doesn't answer your question, but free bus passes for anyone who identifies as a student, right? So if you have no matter how old you are, right? So if you even are doing continuing education, free bus passes. Tempe was the first city in the state of Arizona that did that, and now it's a statewide initiative. But the second thing that came out of that, and we led a process around, was the neighborhood bus transportation system. And this is something you're starting to see more and more about now. You see the 15-foot buses, and some places you see the 20-foot buses, and identifying a way to make it economically sound, right? You can ride it for $1, you can ride it for, $1.50, whatever it may be. But figuring out, back to the traffic patterns at night, we were able to determine that folks were walking in these high traffic neighborhood areas that could allow for a neighborhood transit system. And that's how the neighborhood transit system was born in the city of Tempe, and it ran until 3 o'clock in the morning. And so it was an alternative option that was the in-between between public transportation and micromobility 15 years ago, right? But in between public transportation and micromobility that now serves as a model that is being used around the country, because you don't necessarily need a full bus, you don't necessarily need a full train, a light rail, you don't need that level of scale. But if you take a look at the nightlife, let's use Mill Street for example, if you take a look at the nightlife and then you see that within a 1.5 mile radius or 1.5 kilometer radius, right? You have 1,500, 3,000 people that are walking. How do we overlay that with 2 or 3 bus systems that can run an hour after the clubs close, right? Because these folks are already spending money. They got money to spend. This is an economically viable option, but you just need folks that have the ingenuity to push forward with initiatives like this.
I'm going to add to the whole bus narrative really quick. And one of the things we're hearing from the students a lot is, what is your green product?
Yes.
What are you doing for the environment? The city of Athens has a 16-passenger electric bus now that we sat there and said, all right, and we're a city, of 11 square miles, less than 30,000 is our population. We're probably the first, I know we are, we're the first city in Southeast Ohio to have a bus, electric bus product that the student body absolutely loves. They want it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are getting the signal that it is time to wrap this up, and just on cue, a cloud came through for the first time in an hour. So we got a little bit of a break here. I want to add my thanks to the city of Fort Collins. We got in late on Tuesday night, and we walked from the Armstrong Hotel to, I think it was called the Union Pub and Soda Fountain thing. Walked through downtown on a Tuesday night when college is not in session. And it was vibrant. It was beautiful. So really impressed here. Thanks to the Colorado State University for hosting, and thanks to Joe Falcone from Team Link, who brought 4 bags worth of technology all the way from Washington to make the live stream work today. He did a great job. Thank you all for being part of this. Appreciate it.